Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Does Traditional Spiritual Training Apply Anymore? The talk was given by Lalitha on May 24th, 2025 via Zoom. Lalitha is a spiritual teacher with an ashram in British Columbia, Canada, who was empowered by her master, Lee Lozowick, in 1998. Her books include Waking to Ordinary Life and Cultivating Spiritual Maturity. In this talk, she speaks about the longing of the heart, the intuition of the beloved, and for what is possible for a human being beyond the survival instinct. She notes that we almost always make decisions based on invisible motivations, that personal responsibility is needed on the path, and that we may find that we cannot move through obstacles that we have carried throughout life on our own. Lalitha tells stories from her experience as a healer before she began to teach in her tradition. She says that the content of spiritual traditions may fall away, but that the context can never fall away, and that traditional spiritual training is all about relationship. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Lalitha.
To start off with, it's true that there are hundreds of people who would like to teach something. And there's an infinite variety of names and not even spiritual names. We've got the life coaches, we've got the art teachers, we've got Kung Fu and Aikido, all the martial arts masters. Everybody who wants to actually gather an audience has to portray themselves as smart about something, even if it's just how to cook spaghetti. If you're going to gather some attention to something that you think you have of value, sad to say, you have to market it or you have to present it somehow. And when we use this word traditional, I usually am thinking something that has very deep roots. That's something that comes to my mind, and everyone has a different measuring stick. But I think about really deep, long-lasting roots that comes with traditions that have proven themselves over even centuries sometimes to bear fruit that, for whatever reason, we see value in. Let's say I want to learn art, and I come across an art teacher who does a kind of drawing that I like. And everybody that art teacher has taught, their drawings look pretty good. So I think, okay, they're getting good results. They're teaching people to draw. That's the kind of drawing that feels good to me. So that's where I'll go. So sometimes when we're thinking about a spiritual path, we're talking about teachers, we use our language very loosely. We talk about mentors, spiritual teachers, spiritual masters, spiritual friends, wise elders. There's all these different words that imply, hopefully, the imparting of some kind of help as we decide that we want this vague idea we're going to progress on the path. Like everybody who's here that I can see on Zoom, certainly people here in this room, you've experienced what is often called longing. We've experienced this longing of the heart, the intuition of what's possible for a human being in this lifetime. And often that intuitive sense, that heart of the practitioner, the longing that rises in us the more deeply we practice, that mood, we sometimes call it spirituality, for example. And we wouldn't necessarily put that expectation on an art teacher or a martial arts or an instructor of anything. As we go along investigating our life, we get a little more particular about what we're looking for. So we might start with, well, I just would like to go to some helpful talks. Just want to hear some inspiring talks. And then we might say, well, I need more direct help. we have intuited or at least suspected that there's more, there's something more. And sometimes we just start off thinking the more is maybe these words we read about, enlightenment or freedom or liberation. But as we deepen our practice as practitioners, and everyone that comes to talks like this, certainly nobody would come to a talk of mine if they weren't having this intuition of what the Sufis call the beloved, or the intuition of the divine, or the intuition of what's more, the intuition that this longing that we feel has no conclusion, it has no end. But we know we're feeling it, and we are drawn to nourish it. And some people, some of us, just call that the spiritual path. We want to nourish this heart of longing, and we call that the spiritual path. Some people only call it a spiritual path if they've got rules to follow and stuff to do, and they take the steps and they can measure by. So to start off with, our language is very flexible, let's say. It's very flexible, what we think we're even doing. We can say we're on the path. I've had people say to me that they're on the path, but there's mayhem and chaos all around them, and people are suffering because of their actions. So I look at the fruits of this path, whatever they're pointing to, and I think, well, I don't think I need any more fruits like that. That's not going to suit me. So I don't take it seriously. What I take seriously is when I meet someone, and I have met people like this, and certainly, I practiced guru yoga for decades, and so my own gurus, but also I've been a healer since I was a child. And I've met other people who are really extraordinary healers of all types, psychic healers, energy healers, herbal healers. And so healers also, there are a huge variety, and some of them have such a heart of compassion that when you come to them with your need of some kind, that healer imparts a kind of hopeful wisdom that's just being in their presence. The point that I'm making is that it doesn't have to be that we have to define what's going to be traditional spiritual training right off. We can start with what we're noticing around us right now, and we can look at the fruits of things. And so when I would look at the fruits of some of these amazing healers that I met, and I had a healing teacher who was one of the most extraordinary healers I'd ever met, very spiritual woman, and she had a deep understanding of the subtleties of transformational processes, but she never talked about it. Somebody would come to her and say, I'm half blind, what can you do? And she would fix them. She would do stuff like do some energy wavings over their head or something and tap them on the back a little bit, and then they're all spiffed up. So what do you call that? Is that a spiritual master? Is that a healer? It's a kind, aware, compassionate activity, one human being to the other. And we often start with this. So we have some of the basics. There's a catchphrase that we often hear: kindness, generosity, compassion. Is that the spiritual path? It all sounds good. Does that mean it's a spiritual path? Is it part of a path? Some of these things we read about cause us to hopefully wonder about what is the spiritual path? What would be spiritual? What is traditional spiritual training? Because if any of you have ever looked into this more deeply, spiritual traditions from all over the world, there are some really rough characters that were the spiritual masters. They bump you on the head and kick you in the bum and throw you off, into the bushes and all kinds of stuff. And so nowadays, by Western standards, would we say that they're spiritual teachers? We're also psychologically astute. We'd say, oh, that's not a spiritual teacher. That's abusive. They're abusive. We'd have a different set of labels because we have a different set of mental obstacles that we're working through. So when we're trying to figure out, are we even on a spiritual path? Do we need one? What is spiritual training? Do I apply that term to someone who's teaching me something that seems healthy and good in my life? Or do I apply spiritual training to some other measuring stick that I've got? As soon as we throw the word spiritual into something, ordinary mind goes to what feels good. And then if you throw in words like teachers, gurus, or traditional usually means old to most people. So now we're talking, okay, it's got to be some kind of old knowledge that's traditional. And would old stuff be any better than some of the new stuff? And it's crazy making, this idea of trying to figure out, is there an answer to this question? Does traditional spiritual training even apply anymore? My observation over the decades has been that it's unusual for somebody to be interested in figuring this out in the first place. It's not something that's going to be a real party pleaser to bring up, are I on the path or not? What do you think? Should we have traditional spiritual training? It was not going to be a exciting talking point unless you're with a group of people who have experienced this longing that I was pointing to, this intuition that we gather. Everyone that's here tonight has some type of spiritual practice, either on your own or with a teacher or with a particular path that you study. And we look into that according to, this has been my observation, according to the fierceness, the fieriness that we find in this strong impulse that some of us call longing, or the strong impulse to be, to know. We want to know something that we can say that's true. And these are phases we go through, because after a few decades, you figure out that even the word true is kind of wobbly because it's philosophical at some point. So then once again, we throw up our hands and we go, oh, does anybody know the answer to this stuff? Can I get help anywhere? And then sometimes we think, maybe I do need some help. But then we start with the rules. I want spiritual training, but it's got to be on my terms. It's got to be on the nights that I have off from work. It's got to be only on Zoom or not. I want some spiritual training, but it's got to be free, or it's got to be in my budget. Or right away when we want something, we start evaluating, how much are we going to have to pay? Now, if you've studied spiritual traditions, the price is not how much money you can come up with or how many rules you can follow. The price is your dearly held beliefs and our rigid cultural patterns that maybe we've been born into. I was thinking about spiritual training because we often start out treating it like it's a club. We join a club or we're joining a group of people that we happen to like. Traditional training, it has constant lightning strikes where every time you feel like you've got a handle on something and you've got it figured out, you know the rules, and you're going to win a prize, then the rug is pulled out from under you over and over and over. So this is called annihilation in love, is what the Sufis call it. Doesn't sound very much like loving, does it? If your rug's pulled out from under you every minute. But there are phrases that we often have seen in our spiritual studies that point to this potential of traditional training that we have at least heard has the strength, the clarity, the objectivity to actually produce that type of clarity and calm, centered knowing in us. So at first we're looking, what can do this for me? After many years, if you have a strong practice with some teacher or other, hopefully you pick up from that one. I assume you've vetted them. You feel good about your teacher or your helpers or whatever you're going to call them. Maybe you've built some trust. And so you come to a point where you suspect that however much you have longing to be fully alive and present as a human being in this lifetime, as much as we have longing for that, we discover that we do have a storage closet of back doors, of rules that we think it's supposed to look like. Nobody's thinking annihilation in love. Hardly ever. We don't start off with that. We don't think the word annihilation. We don't think surrender. We don't think submission to anything or anyone. We're still thinking about it in our terms. And so when we ask the question, does spiritual training have relevance anymore? It's a little bit of a tricky question because it only has relevance if we know it has relevance, if we're curious enough to ask the question even. It's not a question that a lot of people think up. Is it relevant or not? So I was writing some thoughts down about it, and I was thinking, about the personal and impersonal aspects of this question. Is it relevant anymore? Because in the impersonal way, we all can imagine whatever we want. We can imagine that there's a God flying around in the sky who's going to give us some angelic help of some kind, or we can imagine whatever we want. It's impersonal. It's out there. Some people call that the numinous, the magical, but it's very different. And some of you have experienced this. It's very, very different when you decide, okay, you want to access help from an embodied, personal human being teacher, because now the obstacles are all stirred up. Your ego kicks in, your judgments, you're trying to compete with your teachers or not. And so spiritual training, the idea of, well, I think I'd like to have some, that goes away pretty quick. You start off, you think, great idea. I'm going to get some special help. I'm going to go visit all these gurus in India or go see some life coaches that inspire me. What a great idea. But right away, we realize, oh, you mean I have to get more responsible about my sex life? What? Change my diet? You mean exercise? And so even the most basic stuff becomes confrontive in the beginning, even when we start off with such a sublime idea. So back to this word longing, it's a very eclectic word. We can label that however we want, but it's this feeling, it's this intuition of what's possible for a human being as obstacles are removed, and then we become more aware. Some people say they have moments of being awake, for example. But there is the impersonal, and that's kind of in the beginning, and then it gets really personal. So I was asking myself, well, when did it become personal to me? When have I observed it becoming personal for my friends? It got personal when our longing was greater than our survival instinct. And this was a really big insight for me, that this whole traditional training, realizing that, yeah, there's a price to pay. Our comfort zone is attacked, not on purpose. It's just part of the package. Comfort zone questions out the window. So why would you and how would you break through that kind of obstacle? If you started to think traditional spiritual training, maybe there's something in there, maybe it does have relevance, but how will I know if it has relevance? You start going through that, and then our survival instinct kicks in. Is it a true teacher or not? Are they telling me the truth, or am I being tricked? Are these rules too hard? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? And we start throwing out obstacles to this grand scheme of maybe we're interested in traditional spiritual training. But then that little voice of longing starts saying, Lalit, feel that. You have this intuition of something more. And then maybe I have the feeling of like, I won't let anything cause me to forget that I have this longing. Nothing is going to get in my way. I go through the fear state. I am 100% in. Nothing's going to dissuade me. I'm willing to pay any price. And that's a stage that we go through. So our survival instinct has a limit, believe it or not. And my observation for decades now is that longing has no limit. And there is a point at which the force and intuition and feeling of longing in our spiritual lives becomes stronger than our survival instinct. And that transitional moment is where it gets really personal, because we still have a survival instinct and we still have all these different eyes saying, what? You got to change this, you got to change that, you know? But the longing is such because we have intuited, and some of us have even had the literal experience of that sublime moment of knowing. And even if it goes away quickly, even if it's just an instant, when you have those experiences, you can never forget them. And that moment of knowing, I'm calling it that, the heart of the practitioner often has this longing builds, this feeling of the awesome nature of the potential of a human being. Some great writers on these topics call it the potential of the human being in relationship to the divine. That kind of implies that everything's separate, but we often start there. We're having a relationship with the divine out here somewhere. But this longing becomes more and more personal. And we find as this deepens, the obstacles that we have carried with us our whole life, we cannot get rid of them on our own. So we start with this question of, well, training would have some relevance. Maybe I do need some help. And maybe I will investigate having a relationship with the teacher. And right away, ego jumps in. And this is the next thing I often hear. There's so much fraud. There's so much self-announced teachers that have no accountability. There's hundreds of teachers. There's no accountability. Many times, if you've even read in a yoga journal or anything, there's advertisements. I can help you with this and I'll do that for you. And most of the time, these are self-announced situations. And when you look more deeply into it, there's not any accountability as you would find, for example, in long lineages in Buddhism, for example, or Sufism, or in my case, in the Bao'u tradition. So I hear this phrase, well, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to be a really smart student. I read this thing that there's a guru within. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tap in to the guru within. And that will be my relevant spiritual training. I'm going to tap into the guru within. In theory, not a bad idea, but I've not yet met somebody who actually had the guru within. They've got a doo-doo head in there, giving them all kind of dumb ideas, so to speak. Lots of gurus within have gotten my friends in big trouble, over the years and even over the decades now. That phrase, I'm going to listen to the guru within. That gets us off the hook once again. We've decided maybe traditional training would be a good thing to investigate, but dang, it's really hard. Plus, it's uncomfortable. I know. I'll listen to the guru within. My guru within thinks I should take it easy on this and calm down a little bit. So we throw up obstacles to ourselves continually. Even getting the idea, does spiritual training have relevance? Just the idea of asking the question, does it have relevance, has great value because it stirs up, oh, I didn't realize I had all this resistance and all these stories and all these funny rules. And now, whoa, you've got a guru within. And not only that, we want to tell everybody else, I've got a guru within, and if you don't have a good one, you can use mine. This is a stage in practice. All of us, we want to do the best we can. And we discover we've tricked ourselves once again into me, mine, attention, look at me, listen to me, these kind of things. And it's crazy making. So how would you even find a teacher that has enough integrity or has the gift of what we call transmission, meaning they could actually transmit their state of being to the atmosphere and to sometimes their students? And this traditional training usually involves teacher-student type of relationship. Back in the 70s, when it was all new age, our phrase was, my phrase even, back in the 60s, 70s, we would say, I'm just following my heart. Well, some of the results of heart following, as a healer, I can tell you, were pretty awful. And they'd come to somebody like me and say, oh, look at the mess my life is. And, I would discover that, okay, a few good ideas came along. We want to do our best. We are going to listen internally and try to come up with the best version of me. But why do I fall back 10 steps when I move forward? How come things collapse around me so regularly? Oh, because I'm figuring out my own mind with my own mind. Oh my gosh, this is impossible. And then once again, we circle around. We think, maybe I need help. Where am I going to get help? Where's the best help? And many of us discover that the type of help that we might be interested in changes over time. It gets stronger, deeper. So we might start off with a couple of yoga classes. Next thing you know, we're going to meditation groups. And the next thing you know, we're meeting a teacher or a mentor or even a guru. I make a big distinction between the guru function and the teaching function. But these things are all in this realm of longing. this intuition of the beloved, some people call it, or the intuition of fullness, being fully alive and happy internally, calm, steady. This all sounds wonderful. There's a price. The price is, to put it in a real cartoonish way, we would have to give up being so unhappy. We'd have to give up being so full of blame that we're constantly on guard and arguing. So, in the most ordinary life way, as practitioners, we become more and more aware that even if we have discovered that we want help, traditional training usually involves a living teacher who's in your face, not in a mean way, but observing, watching, correcting, helping. We discover, whoa, okay, this is a little too personal. I need my personal space. That's the next thing I hear. I'm listening to the guru within, but I need my space. So we throw these obstacles up over and over and over with our kind of clever relanguaging to soften the blow of the result of the question, does spiritual training have relevance? And I think it does. Where can I find it? Oh, here's something that can really help me. I have an intuition that this man or this woman, this teacher, can really help me in some way. And then ego jumps in and says, whoa, wait a minute, Lalitha. What about you need your beer every night at a certain time, and then you have to watch a movie? When are you going to have time? Maybe you need a tradition, and I've heard it all. You need a tradition that you can vote. That's one of the things. Okay, I want serious spiritual training, but it has to be in a group that everyone votes on how they're going to proceed. And it's democratic. We go through that phase. Once again, we ask the question, does traditional training have relevance? We upscale what we think that relevance is. And then we start realizing, no, it's not a committee. It's not a democracy. It's not a club. And then we realize the real kicker with some of this very deep long-term training, the real deal breaker is the phrase, have no life of your own. Ego slams the door shut immediately. Most of the long-term, still living traditions, the ones that are long-term, still alive, and the traditions are strong, in the arena of teachers of those traditions, there are still some who actually have produced the fruits of their practice in this lifetime. It's not everyone, but I think that, especially in the beginning, we can get help from a lot of sources. When you get more deeply into it, you get more serious. You may come to this conclusion that you need in-person help, and then you may further discover, I'm telling you all the secrets ahead of time, because you probably won't believe me until it happens to you. But then you come to this thing, oh, have no life of my own. So most great teachers historically, some of them were very educated and could write, they describe this fruit of longing has this quality of having no life of my own. And when that quality is described, it's described in a mood of delight. Joyous, delightful relief and gratitude and discovery and wow. But to the Western mind, just the phrase is like, what? And that might be where we have to then regroup. We go in these circles quite often. Having no life of my own leads us to the question, what are we afraid of? If I don't have a life of my own, what does that mean? Why do I think that's scary or bad? Why can I not feel it's delightful and great like these teachers I read? Where do they get off saying it's delightful and fun when even the sound of the phrase makes me say, forget this. This phrase has got to be psychotic. What do you mean have no life of your own? It's going to be a mess. So these things all have their price to pay. And this is something that, as years go on, for every practitioner, we discover that this is a worthy question. What am I willing to pay for what I think is freedom, for what I have so far determined as fruits of longing, for happiness, whatever we're going to call it. What am I willing to pay for happiness? Of course, we define these things however we please. Happiness for me, I need 10 sexual partners, or I need $1 million in the bank, or something. It's all very infinitely storytelling time. But it takes some effort. The effort is fearlessness, mental stamina, risk taking. And in order to actually have those attributes, we come full circle back to, okay, we need to practice just like we would in any marathon event. Spiritual path is, until it isn't, you feel like you're on a marathon, an unending marathon, perhaps on some days. And you may be delighted by it. Wow, I'm on the path for sure because I had a couple of visions and I'm feeling great and happy. And then the next day, oh, I lost my money or whatever. I must be off the path. We do find ourselves in this conundrum. Am I on the path or am I off the path? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? Is this a good teacher? Is this a bad teacher? And there does come a time where we have enough fearlessness, enough stamina, enough emotional, mental stamina, at least, and psychic stamina for sure. We have enough that we can say, okay, I can handle some risk. I'm willing to give up a little lust, greed, anger, selfishness, all these things. Oh, yeah, I'm willing to be a little less selfish because I want to investigate more deeply. Sometimes it just comes down to that. We have this heart's desire, we have this longing, but we also have a pile of objections. So if anybody has some comments, oh boy, I'm in trouble now.
It seems like you have to get to the point to realize that the idea that I had freedom of choice was an illusion, that I was already totally enslaved. Then it's different. It's like you realize we're robotic, conditioned beings.
Some of you know this teacher, E.J. Golden. He talks a lot about mechanicality and the mechanical nature of ordinary being, etc. As soon as we are sure that we've had a unique, true idea, we discover, oh no, that was pre-programmed at the age of 3 or whatever. We start discovering our roots and we start realizing that every time we thought we were making a choice, in hindsight, later on, we realize, oh, the choice from my last boyfriend or my last girlfriend. We almost always are making decisions based on invisible motivations. We think we know our motivations. This is a complete tangent sideways, but everyone that you have ever had sex with, just think about this. Each person has their psychic envelope. Each person has their emotional comfort zone. We all attract and repel one another through smell, taste, visuals, how somebody dresses. So we have our packages pre-programmed for what we like and we don't like, what we'll attract, what we won't attract. And they're very strong. So then we have sexual partners in our life, maybe. This is an exaggerated example. So we have these sexual partners or many husbands or many wives over the years or whatever they are. And we think we're making better choices. Let's take it from the point of view of girlfriends and boyfriends. So I have a boyfriend and I'm sure that he's the love of my life. And then some time goes by and I think, oh no, he's no good. He doesn't let me do this or that. I have my objections. So that falls apart. And I think the next time I am going to actually choose differently because I have choice. Many of you who have studied metaphysics maybe already know this, but all of these packages, and think of the billions of people in the world, every single package is hooked on to every single other package. So this is a great cosmic thing that we read about. Nothing is separate from anything else. But when you bring it down to the ordinary life of human beings, the psychic web, the matrix, which is physical, subtle, chemical, mental, these things are contagious. So, and sometimes we like the contagion and sometimes we don't. Contagious in the sense that if we hang around with people of like mind, we contagion each other even more strongly because we all agree. We say we have the same values. Do we really have the same values? How do we come up with these values? But now we've chosen our groups based on, in this cartoon that I'm painting, based on these physical and subtle matrix that we are. Now, they are passed between people. We've all experienced this. We walk into a room where there's been an argument, and we can feel it in the atmosphere. Or we go into a room where it's very loving, and we feel the comfort of that. But from the physical, ordinary human being point of view, things that exaggerate that sharing of mood, things that exaggerate that are when you have more intimate contact. So I'm using sexual contact as an example, but it doesn't have to be that. But sexual contact, particularly potent way that I'll use some extreme language. Let's say we imprint each other. It's a very strong way that we imprint each other. So let's say I have sex with somebody, and it's as if I'm eating their package of preferences. And for a while, it's all good. I like the same things as him. He likes the same things as me. Hooray. Then, there's obstacles, and then we fall apart, but the imprints are there. Nobody's even aware of this, usually. So then we go and we think, I have choice. I'm going to choose differently. But that package that I have taken into myself based on my own affinities, my own opinions, my own blind spots, I take that package to the next lover. Everybody has this. I'm just using sex as an example, but everyone collectively picks up these influences all the time, all along the way. And there are strong ways to pass them on to each other. And sometimes it's just fleeting. Like we read an advertisement and we think, not for me. But if we read an advertisement that really hooks us, it's not because the words were perfect. It's because it has triggered a physical and subtle response. So I go to boyfriend number 2. I've got boyfriend number 1 kind of hanging around. His influences are still there. He loved hot dogs. He only wanted to wear red pajamas, whatever the dumb things are. And I think, forget him. I'm making a new choice over here. I go to the next boyfriend. And completely unconscious to me, influences that I have picked up from boyfriend 1 are still humming. They're influencing me. And I think I'm making a new choice that I bring this package and now I mix it up with the second boyfriend. And then the second boyfriend, he has his packages too. So we exchange packages, but we don't know that. We think we're making new, better choices. And then we discover, I still have the same mental, emotional blocks. I'm still finding fault. I'm still choosing. I think I'm choosing, but how did I end up in the same situation again? So then I get rid of that one. And then I go to boyfriend number 3. And now I've got package 1 and 2. I'm going to 3. Now I'm really savvy and smart because now I am going to make a choice. But my choices are colored by the influences I have collected. And here I am. And you can see in this cartoon depiction here what Gurdjieff would call the horror of the situation. Because we have no choice. And you discover that what we think are unique, especially in great choices, are colored by, this isn't always forever, this is most commonly, the influences that we have picked up unconsciously because of our, to us, hidden motivations, hidden desires, all of these things. So in the ordinary soup of being a person, we come to a moment where we discover, whoa, this human condition is really messy. There's science measuring brain waves and how they connect with each other's brains. And so then your brain gets triggered. So, there is science. If you think science is smart, you could go there. But we do come to a point where we might think, geez, I thought I was making choices. And now I discovered that my first choice was what my grandmother taught me to do. My second choice was what I chose a boyfriend once because of the way he held his cigarette. And then I discovered that my father, who was not smoking at that time, but I saw pictures of him and he smoked in a very particular way. He held his cigarette between 2 fingers and he held it inside the palm of his hand like this because he had been in the Air Force and he had to keep the wind off of it or something. So he held the cigarette inside his palm and he held it a particular way. And so I once chose a boyfriend because I saw his hand holding the cigarette this way. So was that my choice? I don't think so, because a whole lot of other things ensued in that story. And I also learned that, even unconsciously, I picked up that influence. So we come to discover, wow, this is a messy situation. Being a human being, I need some help. How are we ever going to be free of this? How could we ever be awake like we read in the books? What about this longing that I feel? How could it ever be full and alive and joyous like we read about? Does spiritual training, does traditional training have any relevance? Yeah, absolutely. I don't see how we would do what we long for without some help. And then the question of where to get help becomes our next investigation. I'm remembering infinite stories of people who felt they were making choices. And then, of course, we all discover that even this spiritual phrase of teachers having no life of our own, it's already true of us in a neurotic sense. But what are we to do? The picture that Lalitha's painting just sounds hopeless and bizarre. But anybody who's here tonight has experienced this intuition of the beloved, this heart of longing, this heart of the practitioner, this suspicion, this inkling. Sufis sometimes they talk about the perfume. It's not even that they saw a beloved, but they got a whiff of the perfume of the thing. So all of us have had this intuition, and sometimes we've had days or moments of just happiness for no apparent reason, and delight wells up. And even when we're like in the hospital bed, half dead, suddenly this mood of breath of fresh air and this awesome clarity of mind comes over us, and we think, wow, where is that all the rest of the time? Because we've seen it, we've experienced it. So yeah, we can know the bad news, as Gurdjieff says, horror of the situation, that we're not really making choices. But my opinion is, who cares? Who cares if we make a choice? We're not making a choice. We've got influences. We don't. Our grandparents taught us to do this or that. The point is, set an aim, do your practice, keep going. And the heart of longing is priceless in this because it never stops. It never stops. So we can just focus on the direction we want to go. We're not going to be stuck back here. Oh, Lalitha said us can't do any choices and everything is stuck, and every lover I ever had is still in there doing whatever. Who knows? What a horrible idea. Who cares? It's irrelevant. The heart of the practitioner, this intuition of the beloved, is stronger than the survival instinct, and it will carry us. It carries the mood of longing, awakening, being full. It's just extraordinary, the potential of a human being when these previously hidden doorways are opened. How do they open? They open chemically, they open physically in the cells of the brain, they open psychically, they open emotionally. All of you have experienced some version of this. Everyone here in the room with me has experienced some version of this. So that's the relief and the delight and the joyous nature of discovery when we say we're on the path, whatever we're calling the path. It indicates that we never give up. We never stop. We follow that lightning strike that some of us have experienced now and then. And yeah, it can get messy. It can be messy. But that's where fearlessness comes in, and stamina and mental, emotional equanimity. These things are built. They don't just show up because we read some spiritual books. It's because we get help to build stamina. My teacher used to say, be that which nothing can take root in. And I always found that phrase really helpful. And it's not like we all have to be little bowls and join up with his teaching, but I always found that phrase, be that which nothing can take root in. Instead of what we start off with is, I want to do stuff about God. I want to do stuff about awakening. I want to do more stuff, get more practices so that I'm happier or whatever. This is about being, and this is a fruit of longing. So everyone here tonight has some of this fruit of longing, and therefore you have some being, and therefore you are developing longing that is stronger than your survival instinct sometimes. And you have these moments of delight and extraordinary, wow, look what's possible. And so that's actually very good news. Never mind the bleak picture I painted before. I just wanted to actually remind us all, who are we kidding when we say we're making a free choice? Who cares? Make a not free choice. Make the best choice you can. Practitioners do this all the time, and then we learn and we keep going.
I wanted to offer some objective data points from the area of the country that I live in. There is an incredible Dominican sanctuary monastery for nuns that has just closed, the Dominicans of Sinsinawa, and this incredible Trappist monastery, New Mellery Abbey. There are no younger people coming, and that will close down. And where I used to live in Colorado, where Father Thomas Keating lived, this beautiful, beautiful monastery has just been sold. So I just wanted to point out that that kind of tradition seems to be going away. And then to your point, could we even say that there were living masters at those three places? And I feel sad about the fact that there doesn't seem to be the kind of interest that you're pointing to these days.
So one of the things that strikes me, I agree with you that a lot of what we would call traditional spiritual centers, and they're usually based on religion, for example, that those ones that you mentioned are Christian religion rooted sanctuaries, I think. But this is another distinction. We have to apply and use training that has proven itself to survive the entanglements of religion and culture and politics, and currently in our lifetimes, pandemics and all the rest. So, of course, we have to find and practice this lifestyle. The training is always already present. And I also observe that the underpinnings of religions fall apart. I'm in Canada, but I'm an American, and I understand this, that they fall apart. Did they have a living master there or not? I don't know. Lots of really great realizers. I've read about them, and I've known a few. They might have one or two serious students. They might have a lot. If they have a lot, I'm so cynical. 10,000 students? I don't think so. I have like 20. 10,000. You'd die. Anyway, that's my bad sense of humor. So the ideas of spiritual traditions falling away, the content, and this is a big distinction, the content falls away. The context can never fall away. And that is the difference between, all these monasteries are closing. We don't need to make the assumption that spiritual training is dead, but we might suspect that the content no longer suits the context given our situations, our cultural situations, the country we're in, whatever, all the variables that we have. So when I lived with my guru, we all lived on the ashram. We were working on ashram businesses, and that was what we called traditional because we didn't know any better. Later on, people started having their own businesses, or they started having children or getting their own home nearby, and the content changed radically. But the context of longing, the context of the heart of the practitioner, it's been decades probably since I saw you in person, but I can see you here, Zoom isn't that great, I have to say, but I think I'm imagining just from being here and looking at you, I think that you have a strong heart of longing and that you have a strong inner life and that context is held. And this is what individual practitioners can do. We can be that. I like to speak about being invisible, holding our seat, being invisible, practicing long and strong, until we drop dead, whenever we do. I've been around the block with lots of these things with people, but I observe that the practitioner's greatest gift is to hold their seat and practice, not necessarily that you have to join an ashram or a monastery or a religion. The particular spiritual tradition that my guru was in wasn't even a religion. It's not a religion, but it has teachings, it has smart ideas about stuff to do. For me, it was always based on personal connections because I was lucky to be born at a time where I still had that in-person connection. And I think it's hard to find now. So I think you have a really good point. It's really hard to find. You're not going to go to a monastery usually and find this stuff, or a church. We used to have these things in high school with job fairs. You'd go to the fair and every company was there. You'd have to go and see, like, what's going to be your career. So some people shop around like that. What's going to be my spiritual tradition group, savior, club, democracy committee, or whatever? That's all fine. But I think the content has shifted. And there's a lot of dead content all over the place. As individual practitioners, the most priceless gift we have to offer is our practice. Invisibly, we don't get to go out and say, hey, look at me, I'm such a great practitioner. I'm holding my seat over here. Who wants to come and pay attention to me? It's in your home. If you have pujas, some of you like to do puja tables or prayers or whatever the thing is. And many of you do have a connection to a spiritual tradition, whether you engage it directly or not, or whether you go to ashrams or not, or whatever. Maybe you have some good company, because that's really extraordinary if you're so lucky to have some good company in your spiritual practice. There's so many variables in this stuff. And of course, we can get ourselves in trouble with anything we do. I knew a person when I was a healer who half killed himself because, and this is true, he ate too many bananas. Who would ever think that bananas would be like life-threatening? Anything, could be anything. That was a really rare thing, but he ate so much. Bananas have tons of potassium, and there is such a thing as potassium poisoning, because it's not really a poison, but if you get too much potassium, it unbalances all the other minerals, and then your hair falls out and all this stuff happens. It's almost impossible to do that. But this guy decided banana diet. So of course we can say I'm on a spiritual banana diet, and then too bad. But it's the context. Longing is the context. And every individual, the biggest gift we have is being that context as best we can. And it can mature. Lee had wrote this essay when we were all really young students, and he wrote this essay, The Divine Path of Growing Old. And we go, what? We're not old. What do you mean the divine path of growing old? How is that even relevant? And, now when I'm old, I think, oh yeah, there's some relevance. There's something to be said about life experience, but there's also something to be said that when we see the content dying around us, we nourish and replenish the context. And that is the heart of the practitioner. That's the heart of longing. That is the perfume of the beloved. So we can do that separately as individuals. We can get together now and then and re-inspire ourselves if we come to a talk like this. Or some of us are lucky enough that we have a living teacher that helps, like super fuel for some of us, that we come to discover, who cares? I don't have a choice. My teachers and gurus, they all had their way of doing things, because every teacher has a personality. So there's all these different flavors. It really helps if your personalities get along. And my personality got along great with my teacher. We had areas where we really clashed, and it didn't matter, because the content of clashing did not disturb the context of the beloved. And there's a type of fearlessness in that. So sometimes it pays off to just now and then ask ourselves, what am I currently afraid of? To investigate some of these edgy questions. What am I currently afraid of? What delights me the most, just for the heck of it? And then I find it useful for people to develop an aim. You can change the aim 10 times a day if you want, but to develop an aim for your spiritual life, an aim for your inner work, And then when you have to make decisions, oh, the monasteries are dying, really sad. Well, yeah, that is sad. And we can reorient and say, okay, I have an aim. This next decision that I'm going to make, does it serve my aim? And of course, we do spend a lot of time making decisions because it serves our bank account or our sex drive or our next buying of a car or something. Those things are just part of ordinary life. But we're talking here about the deepest root where we can rest as practitioners in this chaotic, disturbing, anxiety-provoking world. There's wars, there's famine, there's cruelties, there's horrible stuff everywhere, always has been, still is. Sometimes somebody said to me, well, if we could only go back to the good old days. I think I was in my 20s. And I thought, yeah, that sounds good. Was there ever a good old days? That sounds good. I really did a deep dive into history to find the good old days, and there weren't any, and I was so discouraged. So we are the good old days. It's the context that we're talking about.
Something that's coming up as I'm listening is that to me, it seems like spiritual training isn't static. There's no prescribed format. Specific practices are part of it. But what I'm hearing also is that it's relationship. If you go that route to someone who's stable in their life and who's willing to help you with, I think you described it as invisible motivations, something that maybe we're blind to. To me, I can own that. I can see that's been active in my life. And having someone to point that out and work with you on that is so rare, and that you can trust. It seems like that's part of spiritual training, as well as doing the practices. However, it seems that no one is going to save us. And that seems like a trap on the path for some people.
Absolutely.
For someone to save me. Would you say something about the distinction between relying on oneself and being responsible for one's own work, and being vulnerable and listening to someone who's further along the path, to a teacher or a guru, if you feel like there's some need to go deeper?
Well, I don't think anyone would come to these podcasts if they haven't figured out that they wanted to go deeper, because you could be doing a lot of other stuff. And here we sit. So there's that. But the idea of being responsible, we need to be responsible for our own work. So the teacher, the guru cannot do your work for you. And this is when I was really a young student. I was very disappointed to hear that because I thought, even before I met Lee, who's my guru, even before then, I met some powerful, amazing healers. And every time I'd meet one that had healing powers, they'd look inside your body and say, oh, you've got a crooked this or that. Or they would wave their hands and somebody would get unblinded and stuff like that. I think, whoa, maybe that's enlightenment. Maybe that's freedom. Maybe I can rely on that. Maybe I need to hook onto that healer person. This was when I was in my teens and 20s. And then all these things mature. So how are we even going to know? Do we have to know? Do we have to decide that we're reliable? Can't we just pretend? Can't we just say, I'm going to rely on not just rely on my opinions. I'm not saying that, but I'm going to say to myself that I will stand up in my personal work and I will take responsibility for the effort that it takes, for the sacrifice that it takes. I will stand up and practice. I will stand up and attempt this life of practice. I will be responsible for that. Really simple stuff. When we get that we're responsible, then we're probably smart enough to figure out maybe we do need some help, because we can be responsible for making that choice. If I have inexperienced people of any age asking me where to start, I always say, get a stable lifestyle, however simple it has to be. Pay your rent, handle your debts, develop some kind of discipline of study and sit still 10 minutes a day, really simple stuff. Just make an effort to participate in this intuition of longing, this heart of the practitioner. So, yeah, we're responsible for our own work. Once we get that and even make a little effort, we usually attract some help. We don't have to say, I'm looking for the perfect help. Many of us have experienced that, help comes our way, so to speak. For many decades with people, we've discussed this idea of how would you proceed as deep as you would have to go without any accountability to some kind of help. And my responsibility as a student would be to attempt to practice as best I can, be of service where I can, to actually pay with my time, with my attention, with my effort. These things are what you have to be responsible for as a student, obviously. And then the teacher's job is to be available and to participate in the relationship. It's all about relationship when you're talking about traditional spiritual training. Relationship is non-negotiable, whatever it looks like, whether you have a teacher in your life or not.
I've found that sometimes I've had to explore and learn for myself. My teacher has never stood in the way of that. I've maintained my relationship to the teacher through that. But that's been important learning for me too. I felt like my teacher would tell me exactly what I should do, but sometimes it hasn't been like that. It's been really maintaining the context of this, and I had to learn my own lessons.
I know that always pissed me off. Even when I used to do a lot of healing, people would come to me in such dire straits and so sick and suffering. And I would say, can you just eat less hamburger? Oh, no, not my hamburger. Lee would say to me that I expected too much. And he wasn't the only one. My old healing teacher, who's deceased now, she also would say, you're given the solution, but it's a lot to expect that everyone is just going to say, oh, yeah, I'll give up my dearly held beliefs, whatever, even if it's a simple thing. Out here in Canada, I had a neighbor who had the most crippling arthritis I'd ever seen. And it was getting worse and worse. And she could hardly move, suffering like crazy, comes over to see me, to live at the neighboring farm, comes to visit, tells me, look how bad it's getting. And I'm on all these drugs. I have to wake up with drugs and go to bed with drugs. And I'm in such pain all day long. And can't you help me? I heard, all about herbs and plants and energy. So, all about healing. And she started telling me about her lifestyle. Nowadays, we have the internet. If you look up on the internet, what's the worst stuff to do that makes arthritis the absolute worst? She was doing all of them. Heavy meat, heavy cheese, alcohol, sugar constantly. Even on the internet, which is very conventional usually, it says the absolute worst stuff that boosts arthritis like crazy. These are the things. She was doing all of them. And I had learned my lesson by then. I was older. I was in my 60s, I think, by that point. So I was trying to be tactful. And I said, have you ever investigated online what might be harmful or helpful for arthritis? Have you ever looked it up? Oh, no, she said, I'm kind of nervous to look it up because, I have my ways. She said something like that. And I goes, well, she says, what do you think? Have you looked it up? And I said, yeah, I've looked it up. And she says, well, what hurts it? And I named a few things. And she said, oh, that's too much to expect from me. She said, I have food addictions and I have my comfort zone. And she said, I couldn't do without this or that. She said, mentally, emotionally, I don't even want to think about changing my lifestyle. What else have you got? And I said, well, if you don't want to change your lifestyle, I guess you already are doing what you can do, which is go and get the pain drugs from the doctor. So, oh, phew, okay, I can just go back to the doctor. And she was literally hardly could walk. When I first met her, she walked up my steps and would come see me. And now I'd have to go meet her at the bottom of the steps. She couldn't even take a step. And even faced with such suffering, some of us might respond like that. Oh no, don't suggest that. That's too much to expect. And that applies to everything. It applies to, can we be responsible for our own practice? The guru, the teacher, the mentor says, well, let's investigate. Let's try to meditate for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. When I had young students a long time ago, some of the younger ones, I thought 10 minutes was this really weenie, easy thing anybody could do. And I'd say 10 minutes. And they go, 10 minutes? And I'd say, well, what do you think you can handle? And well, I've meditated for 2 minutes. Sincerely, the stories that we tell ourselves, we really have to keep our sense of humor. This intuition, this mood of being able to be responsible for our, we call it sadhana, our spiritual practice, completely depends on how desperate we are a lot of times. Have we come to the point of desperation in our realizing the complicated horror of the situation of humankind? Never mind the stars, the planets, all the other sentient beings and aliens and all the rest. We can't even handle the human being department over here. And so that's something that we've come to understand. And then when we get a little bit of an inkling of, oh my gosh, Lalitha described that every lover I ever had might still be hanging around. Just for the record, it doesn't have to stay that way. I was just describing the worst part, but it doesn't have to be that way. But, we say, well, okay, I'm not even making choices. This is really scary. I'm desperate. I'll do anything. Well, the anything is kindness, generosity, compassion, practice, take responsibility for the fire, because it'll go away sometimes. We'll have this desperate knowing that, okay, I'm going to be responsible. And then tomorrow I wake up and go, what was I thinking? And then we have to start over. But when you have good company, like coming to talks like this, knowing good company for sure, developing the stamina that it takes to actually be fearless and take a risk. Take some risk, not risking your life. Take a risk with, maybe I could change a little something. Maybe I could do 10 minutes instead of 2 minutes. Simple stuff. It's such a huge topic. And it goes from the most convoluted, ordinary mess to the most sublime.
What was that thing that you came up with? Let me serve and be served.
Yeah. I welcome that which you would have me serve. I welcome that which you would have serve me.